Hello and welcome to Colonial Outcasts, the anti-imperialist podcast that all the Blue MAGA DNC bootlicking reactionary CHUDS, cannibalistic humanoid underground denizens, in my comments section, lambasting me for critiquing Jasmine Crockett and connecting the Palestine issue to why you will never be able to afford a home here in the U.S. will absolutely hate. We have a hell of an episode here for you, starting with Russia, Trump's apparent war against the EU, insane militarism coming out of Europe, expanding into the Eastern Mediterranean, talking about energy and Cyprus, what's really going on with Turkey, and maybe we'll have time to, bring in Thailand, Cambodia, border conflicts, because it's all connected, man, which is why we are joined today by regular contributor Elina Xenohpontos, coming to us from the Imperial Colony of Cyprus. I hate everything right now. How you doing?
Oh, yeah, it's great. I love the introduction, man. Yes, from the Imperial little island of Cyprus.
Yeah,
But
it's
we're
little.
going to soon have the presidency of the EU, apparently. Just going to put that out there. Great
Yeah,
timing.
Cyprus is going to become the presidency of the EU. So I guess you can feel like you're in power while actually being completely used as like a communal
Mm-hmm.
vassal state between like the US, UK, and Gulf states now.
Oh, yeah. But, people fall for that. But we'll get into that, and always happy to be here to dissect that for everyone.
Yes. There's a lot going on. Europe's in free fall right now, which is, I don't know, kind of interesting. I'm kind of wondering when they will just wake up and decide to like not be a vassal state to the US, but we'll absolutely get into that. First of all, I want to say congratulations in the most sarcastic way possible to Jose Antonio Cast, Chile's new far-right president-elect. And you may be like, that's a weird last name for a Chilean to have. Why does it sound so German? You know why it sounds so German, okay? Cast's victory is seen as a part of a recent trend of right-wing victories across Latin America, including Argentina and Ecuador. Cast campaigned on the promise of change. He said he would address voter concerns by carrying out crackdowns on crime and immigration, including a campaign of mass deportation, similar to what the United States President Donald Trump has done in North America. And Washington is very happy about this lurch to the right. From a Chilean journal that I talked to yesterday about this, quote, honestly, it's not that shocking from inside. A lot of people were disappointed by Boric. He governed tibio, basically as soft liberal. So for many people, nothing materially changed. Add Chile's deep anti-communist conditioning and a lot of classism. Many Chileans don't want to see themselves as working class, but as temporarily embarrassed millionaires. Fear, disappointment, lack of class awareness, and solidarity did this. I mean, we tried to change the Pinochet-era constitution a couple years ago, and the people voted no, even after months of uprising. Unquote. So basically, Cass said he would support Trump when it comes to Venezuela, and he thinks that getting rid of Maduro would benefit the region. With regards to that, we think Venezuela might turn into a hot war over the holidays. I do think so. We're doing sports betting in the most macabre and grim way possible because Christmas exodus for the U.S. Caribbean fleets has been canceled. No one's going home. And presidents historically launch controversial combat operations when Congress is in recess. Plus, the Epstein files are supposed to be released on Friday. So Thursday night bombing run, anybody? Nobody wants this. All right. We're sleepwalking our way into another war. But hey, we cannot tolerate any sort of left-wing government in the American continent. So tens of thousands of people must die. And since, we generally do like capitalist or like critiques of capitalism here, but because I'm an antiquities nerd, I'd like to say to everyone who is celebrating the decline of the United States as like the fall of the Roman Empire, you've got the wrong historical analogy. This is not the collapse of the Roman Empire. This is more like the collapse of the Roman Republic. This is the collapse of the stage of the entity in which ordinary citizens have a say in their own government. This is the period before the rise of an empire and a protracted period of expansionist, destructive, warlike insanity. You thought it was bad before? You just wait until they don't have to have any pretext anymore. Wait until they don't have to have any checks on their ambition. Wait until they can do whatever they want right out in the open without having to explain it to the public, because that is what we are looking at next and now. You actually don't have to wait. It's naive to think that this is the collapse of the empire itself. Do you have any idea how looming and powerful and deeply rooted and interconnected the United States and its military assets and economic pressure are? We are looking at the beginning of an era of belligerent, outright expansionism by the United States. And if you are imagining a scenario where the United States just shrinks from its position as the dominant global superpower without first lashing out at everyone, you're out of your minds. That's what they're stress testing right now. That's what the point of the Trump administration is to see how much public pushback they get while they throw out these things that they might do. Notice how the Democrats are just going along with it, and there is no public pushback. So once they've finally eliminated the last Republican institutions, once they have finally eliminated the last traces of public involvement in the government, this is what we will be left with. So that's a better analogy. I think it's not the fall. It's not the fall of the Roman Empire. All right, we're getting into our straight, like, all the window dressing is gone, straight imperialism. So since I've been mired in Texas politics for the past 2 weeks, more on that in the future after the holidays, Elina came up with the concept of this episode and is going to take point on it. I would just like to say that before we get in the weeds, that we are cognizant that geopolitics has like a massive knowledge-based barrier to entry, and I don't care how smart you are, it still takes years to cultivate and establish. So if you would like, we talked about this before, a less autistic or ADHD rendering of foreign affairs, we have a more chilled out spin-off show called Dungeons and Democracies, where myself and Pulitzer Prize winning journalists with no background in this stuff at all, Maggie Freeling, discuss foreign affairs in a liberal mom-friendly way, while getting slightly tipsy after Thursday night. So we still workshopping it, but that is on the Colonial Outcasts Patreon. So that's an alternative, because this one's going deep, y'all. Anyways, strap in. It's going to be dense. So, Elina, I'm pretty much done yapping, and we're going to be talking about some insane militaristic rhetoric coming out of the EU and NATO-aligned countries. I just want to humanize this whole conversation. We saw the infamous quote by Mark Rutte the other week, and I'm just going to play that real quick.
Is at our door.
Conflict is at our door. This is talking about militarizing in the face of what they imagine as Russian aggression in Ukraine towards the entire European continent.
Russia has brought war back to Europe, and we must be prepared for the scale of war our grandparents and great-grandparents endured.
Okay, well, that's cool. You're completely delusional. That everything is completely unnecessary. And I told my buddy Will, who was just arrested by the Secret Service this weekend for harassing Nazi politicians in Washington, D.C., that I would play this video about this insane militarism coming out of the EU.
I just watched Jolly's post from last night, and it really got me thinking about, I was talking to the Secret Service agent who was driving me to jail the other day, and he was a National Guard soldier, and I asked him, have you deployed yet? And he said, no, unfortunately not yet. And, that unfortunately really hit me, because I remember being 18. I remember, joining the Army Infantry. I knew it wasn't for nothing, but I felt cocky. I felt bravado. We were all excited. We were going to fucking war. We didn't know what the fuck that meant at the time, but our goal was to earn our combat infantry badges. That's the one I wear on the side of my hat as a constant reminder. We didn't know what the fuck we were in for. We were fucking excited. We were fucking programmed from youth to think it's fucking cool. And when we landed and we heard the fucking mortar rounds coming in the distance, we got even more excited. We were so goddamn excited. We had something to fucking prove. But then the IEDs started blowing up. Then we started to see the bodies of the children. Then we started to lose battle buddies. Then we had to cower from snipers. Then we had to crawl through shit because we're pinned down by enemy machine gun fire. Then we're driving down those roads every moment wondering if it's going to be our turn to get hit by a double stack anti-tank mine. War is not fun. War is not... War, there's no glory in war. There's nothing to prove in war. There's no honor in war. Going to war does not make you a man. War is fucking hell. Nothing more, nothing less. War should be the last resort. War should be something we avoid at all fucking costs, at all fucking times. There should be no war. I always say, you know, those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it, but here we are with all the information, all the fucking world's information in our fucking pockets at all times. Yet we can't change anything. War is hell, folks. Don't wish for it. I don't wish war on anyone, no matter what.
And like, I don't know. I just watched that video and I was like, holy shit, Will, you kind of said it all. Like, all the information is at our fingertips. Like, we know that the war in Ukraine is lost. We've been saying it for years. You know, we know that like NATO cannot remilitarize. These things can't happen. But we're still seeing these warmongers in Brussels push this. So kind of to bring the energy back up, you were recently in Brussels, the beating heart of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. As I understand it, it's a headquarters rife with delusion. Can you just tell us about your like experience there?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was very interesting 'cause I hadn't actually been to Brussels in probably around 7, 8 years, and the atmosphere had completely changed when I got there this time. The first thing you see, and I don't know, I sent you the image if you want to pull it up for the
Yeah,
audience who are watching on YouTube, because it's an image is worth 1,000 words, they say, and I think in this case it's the case. You walk into, as soon as you arrive basically at Brussels airport and you're walking past to go to passport control, you see this massive sort of digital what you call it, like screen, and it takes up the entire, like half the walking area, that says, you know, Brussels, home to NATO headquarters, and all these little NATO badges and flags. And you know, this was a completely unheard of. I mean, you would not have seen something like that in the center of, I guess, the European Union, because obviously Brussels is where the European Parliament is, where the European Commission is based. I mean, everything is centralized inside Brussels. And now you're seeing them take this massive, you know, stance with regards to NATO, and it's constantly being spewed everywhere at all times and every day. And having contact with the people that I was there at the time, and I was actually speaking on a panel with Mariam Barghouti from the West Bank, for those that are aware of her work, as part of the University of Ghent's kind of, it was kind of like a project, let's say. Everybody that was working at the university, students, and pretty much everybody I had come into contact with, were telling me that the rhetoric and the sort of the warmongering and the fear mongering that's being perpetrated at the moment by the European leaders, by the, you know, political class, but also the media, is so rampant. And this was never the case. And you can see what they're trying to do is, indoctrinate the masses into really believing that, you know, Russia's going to come and you need to mobilize and you need to act now. And, you know, I don't know if you found the image, or we could just.
I got it. I got it.
But
It's
oh,
sideways.
it's sideways. Oh, okay. Well, this is what I saw. This is what I saw when I got there, basically.
Welcome.
But this was unheard of.
Welcome to Brussels, home of NATO, protecting peace, freedom, and security since 1949.
This was never the case before. You would have never seen something like this before in Brussels to this degree, not at the airport, not at arrival. This is considered far too political to be at the airport upon arrival. This is insanity, but this is the situation that Europe is currently in. And you can see how they're trying to manufacture consent towards war. I mean, even Germany just recently, I mean, this has been an ongoing theme throughout the 2025. They're trying to bring back mandatory conscription. And that has even faced massive backlash because, you know, there've been massive protests in just the last week alone, with thousands of people taking the streets, you know, wanting to go directly against and opposing this new sort of legislation with regards to mandatory conscription. But it's not even just that. We now have conscientious objectors, especially, look, German army struggles to get Gen Z recruits ready for war, with many Germans who are already in the military dropping out, and we're having conscientious objectors who are refusing to actually serve the army. And you can see how the rhetoric of the political establishment in the EU and NATO is trying to bring about this fear mongering about Russia taking over, but it's not working on the general population. It's actually failing.
It's failing for a number of reasons. First of all, like the material conditions in Germany aren't like great. It's like, what are we exactly fighting for? But also, like, yes, Russia has a massive industrial base. It has massive manpower base. They can keep fighting forever. However, it's just not a strategic possibility that they will invade continental Europe. It's just not.
Yeah. I think I have seen some reports in the last couple of days whereby people are, I think it was again on the Financial Times, I'm not quite sure. And according to them, there is a fear particularly within citizens of France and Germany, about 50% of people fear a war with Russia, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they fear that Russia's going to invade. But due to the escalation and the political rhetoric, even by the European establishment and political class itself. So, I mean, there is a fear, but is that something that people want? Absolutely not. Is that something that people are willing to endure? Absolutely not. Because like you said, I mean, for the average European citizen, but particularly, for example, in the case of Germany, I mean, like we've said multiple times in the show, they've been rapidly deindustrialized. Like a lot of businesses have, a lot of the, more predominant business in Germany have actually moved out of Germany, have relocated in different locations, the US being a prime sort of location for a lot of German business, meaning that this has obviously had a significant impact on the economy and the employability for the vast majority of Germans. And we're seeing that. We're also seeing all the hundreds of billions that have been sent to Ukraine and how that's cut into their welfare. And the Germans, up until this point, especially in the last two decades, they've lived a very prosperous and affluent life, with a very strong welfare system. Now, how they've had that welfare system and how it's based on the sort of systemic and economic discrepancies and asymmetries within the European Union that they themselves exploited, that's another thing. However, the government up until this point was able to provide a sufficient welfare to appease people. However, that has eroded, and it hasn't eroded over the course, say, of a decade. It's eroded significantly in just about 2 to 3 years. And now they're also told we're going to have to give more money to Ukraine and possibly even prepare for war. And I don't think a lot of European citizens even fully understand why are we preparing for war? What is the purpose? And what exactly, how does this fit in with us, the conflict with Ukraine and Russia? But you can see the Europeans are saying, no, it starts off with Ukraine. And the idea is Russia's going to take over Europe. How and why Putin would want to take on such an operation is beyond me. But they really are trying to push this. Oh, he's a crazy madman who wants to restore some sort of, the Russian Empire and take over all territory without any rationality, none whatsoever.
Yeah, and I don't think like even trying to remilitarize, there's actually an intent to fight Russia. They're just trying to remilitarize.
Right. So I don't know if do you want to play, because I was going to get into it after the Mertz clip,
Okay,
because I was going to break down that specific clip because I agree with you.
Okay, so this is Mertz. He's the head of the EU, right? Am I mixing up my political?
No, Germany. No.
Germany.
He's,
Germany.
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 Yeah.
Okay. So, basically, they're talking about the Pax Americana. So, Pax Americana. Just to define terms, the Pax Roma. It's based off this idea of the Pax Romana, which is a roughly 200-year-long period of ancient Rome that's described as like the golden age of increased and sustained Roman imperialism, stability, and hegemonic power, and it basically is this false sense that this is the time where the empire was the most stable, not really backed up historically. And it's kind of like this, I would say, like reactionary idea about like we need to go back to this time of imperial hegemony, so we can reestablish a golden age. But it's completely ahistorical, just like any sort of like past utopian vision. So he's talking about the Pax Americana, where America ensured the stability and safety of Europe. And I'm going to have to translate for him because this is in German. Or sorry, transliterate for him because this is in German. All right. The decades of the Pax Americana are largely over for us in Europe, and also for us in Germany as well. It no longer exists as we knew it. And nostalgia won't change that. Okay, Mertz can talk faster, and I would be one of the ones who would gladly indulge in that nostalgia, but it's no use. That's the way it is. The Americans are now very, very ruthlessly pursuing their own interests. Okay, what? Oh, he's just realizing this now? Yeah, so...
Okay, so this is the thing. This is part of the political spectacle, the theatrics right now that's going on between the EU and the United States. There's this I mean, this has been sort of ongoing for the last few months. This image that there has been a tarnishing of the relationships between the EU and the United States, and that supposedly that the US is kind of throwing the EU under the bus. So we now need to militarize. We now need to cut more into our welfare system. You're going to have to struggle because we need to secure our military. All that money, by the way, all the money that's going to be taken from people, from the social welfare programs within Europe are then going to be basically redirected into the military industrial complex, which is predominantly American multinational corporations. That money is going to flow straight into their bank accounts in order to fuel this militarization process, and to alarm people as to accepting that. So it's part of this this image that's being created to justify further expenditure, to justify the impact that this is going to have on the European citizens, and by artificially creating these divides. And we've seen the United States do this multiple times with their allies. In just this year alone, we saw the same thing happen between, supposedly there was a rift between the US and Israel when it came at the same time that there was these negotiations with Iran, and then it was exposed, as we had actually speculated and stated rightfully on the show, that was nothing more than a political spectacle in order to deceive the masses into believing that Israel and the United States were not completely aligned, and that the United States was it did intend to negotiate with Iran on goodwill, but actually it was more of a decoy for Israel and the United States to do what they were planning on doing, obviously initiated the 12-day war. The same thing is now happening between the European Union and the United States, because ultimately, when they're talking about self-interest, if the EU is ultimately concerned about its own self-interest and its own self-preservation, well, frankly, you don't need to have a hostile relationship with Russia. I mean, the entirety of your economic prosperity for the last several decades has come from the, frankly, sort of exploitative cheap relationship that gas cheap relationship that you had essentially with Russia. And I mean, that's the fact that they were able to extract cheap natural gas from Russia was the way that a lot of the European industries, whether it's automobiles, but even agricultural sectors, were able to retain their industries, but also retain a competitive edge on the global market. You have now lost that, and in fact, actually, it was back in 2017 when Emmanuel Macron, he had actually openly stated, our future, the prosperity of Europe, is Eurasian. It's looking towards the east, not towards the west, which agitated and aggravated a lot of the political establishment at the point in time in the United States, with Condoleezza Rice even coming out and stating, and Biden at the time, that this was dangerous rhetoric. And that's actually why I said the war in Ukraine actually defeated the EU, not even Russia. The greatest losers have been the EU. And this is what's ironic here. I mean, how can you be speaking about the interests and the self-preservation, and well, if the Americans are looking out for their interests, we have to look out after our own, and continue to push for aggressive foreign policy towards Russia, when if you're looking towards your own self-interest, you would try to seek peaceful negotiations, and probably even try to reopen your economic trade and commerce with Russia. And that's not what the European Union is doing. What they're doing is amplifying war rhetoric, which is going to deteriorate the material conditions in Europe even more.
At this point, it's the only sane thing to do, is to find a way to work with Russia. And I don't want to go off on a tangent on this, but some idiot in the comments section, I don't know why I open up comments anymore on political material. It just pisses me off. He's like, well, remilitarizing, reindustrializing the European military industrial complex will make jobs. No, it won't, dude. I'll give you an example. I'm going to show you the future of arms manufacturing by using a case study of the U.S. trying to militarily reindustrialize. All right, so I was just in Paducah, Kentucky, for this wrongful conviction case that we were covering, and it's about like 5 miles away from this podunk out in the middle of nowhere town where a U.S. has awarded a Turkish firm, Repcon, almost $500 million to start making TNT in the United States. Because as you know, like NATO has like 2 factories pretty much one factory in Poland that supplies all our explosive material for 155 artillery shells for all of Europe, Canada, and the United States. So if you just blow up that one factory outside of Warsaw, we're done. Like, we can't. So this is us trying to reindustrialize our volume-based, high-intensity conflict stockpiles. You know, it's not about precision weapons. It's about high volume of, you know, things like artillery shells. But the thing is, and this is why it won't create jobs, the future of arms manufacturing is what Repcon is doing. It's a Turkish firm. They basically build out these what they're called turnkey facilities. The premise is it employs as few people as possible and is as automated as possible. So you literally, when you turn the factory on, you just turn a key and you don't actually have to have humans working there. So this is the future of large-scale defense manufacturing. So I just wanted to point that out, that no one's getting employed from this. Aside from the contractors who get 1 gig to build the actual factory, there's going to be so few people doing it. And it's because we don't have skilled labor that knows how to do it anymore. So,
not to mention that a war itself is destructive, right? So if you, let's just say for 1 second, you know, like you go to war directly with Russia and Russia starts bombing key infrastructure, which they can throughout the EU, that destroys your entire economy. You're going to need decades, as it's happened before in the European continent, to rebuild. And guess who profited last time? The United States, who was basically providing all the loans over to Europe in order to rebuild at that particular point in time. That's what's going to happen. I mean, this idea that you're going to go to war, you're going to reinvest in the military-industrial complex, or, and sort of reindustrializing through the form of like, you know, building military equipment, et cetera. Much like you said, in this, based on the current, you know, a structure of production, that's not going to necessarily be the case. But if they do keep pushing even for war and engaging this war rhetoric, which they clearly are, I mean, what do? You're risking the very economic base of and stability of your own economies, which has long-term repercussions. So this is not a win in any way, shape, or form.
You know, I'm thinking about. I'm not sure what kind of like programmed indoctrination you had going through school, but in America, like, and even in our like history textbooks, like when we were like 12, 13, 14 years old, it talks about like World War II and the Great Depression. And there was this just entrenched ideas that like war is good for the economy. It lifts everybody up. But I guess like growing up is learning that that was all propaganda BS.
Oh, I mean, it's good for certain. It's good for the ruling classes.
Yes,
very small. Yeah, very small. It helps them make the 1% 0.5%, 0.01%, and 0.0001%. That's what war effectively does. Because essentially, you know, when there's massive destruction, it allows essentially it gets rid of the overproduction crisis. It gets rid of the overproduction crisis, yes, and creates new avenues for profit making. But it allows them to further monopolize the economy. It's, you know, and all those small, medium-sized companies, but even bigger companies that were not able to, I guess, adapt, will get bought out. And this is how you monopolize more power and wealth. This is not going to trickle down into improving the material conditions of the working class. And especially at this particular point within the current stage of capitalism that we're currently at. So, I mean, this is the thing. So, like when Merz is coming in and he's giving his speech, like it's the end of the Pax Americana, and, you know, we need to become self-sufficient, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, how is this looking at your self-interest by, you know, preaching war with Russia, who has actively said on multiple occasions, we're not seeking war with Europe. They simply want their national security threat that it has been threatened. They want it to be respected. They want to establish sort of a form of peace treaty where the security of the EU as well as Russia is respected. And they want this to come to a swift end. It wouldn't be to the benefit of Russia to invade the EU. So this rhetoric is just that. It's rhetoric. They do not care about the EU. It's just another way to pump money into into the military-industrial complex and for other financial institutions, among many others.
Yeah,
and yes,
this
is
also to expand the national security state, which always is a mechanism by which to tamp down on political dissent too, which will only increase as material conditions worsen. So it's all working together in a big crucible of shit. But as we can see this political poll that you sent me, yeah, Ukraine support in Europe is definitely on the wane. Two of the most, this was German and French respondents.
Yeah.
Yeah, the two of the
Yes.
most important countries in the EU in terms of like the industrial base and power, GDP and stuff. But like, yeah, wow, that's really declining from what it used to be.
Yeah, people no longer want to support what they consider to be a futile war that is having negative repercussions on their own livelihood, to see their tax dollars being directly spent to fund, the financial capitalist class, the military industrial complex, among many others, which is being basically, because that's essentially what's happening. Their tax dollars and hard-earned money is not being returned to them in the form of, through, welfare anymore, but it's being kind of swallowed whole by these conglomerates inside of Ukraine. And so they no longer want to continue. They don't even want to continue funding the war, no more or less start building towards military, confrontation with Russia itself. This is simply something that's not going to work. This is not 1930s anymore. You're not going to be able to galvanize people in the same way. We're at a different stage of history that is just simply not going to work. And, I kind of wanted to say at this point as well, as I said earlier on, the war in Ukraine has issued, like I said, the greatest defeat to the EU. They are the greatest losers in this entire project. And because of that, and this is the irony, because of that, they don't have access anymore to the same dependent energy sources that they once had to. They are paying quadruple the amount in order to be able to import LNG from the United States at the moment, and that has had significant repercussions on a lot of their industries. But even in the field of AI and high tech, they're no longer even a competitor. And I remember we kind of discussed this in one of our previous episodes, because obviously you need access to abundant amounts of energy in order to be able to even participate in the field of high tech and AI, in this high tech race that's currently taking place between the United States and China. And the EU is not even a contender. It's becoming essentially completely sidelined because of these decisions that it's decided to take. Because many people ask, well, why would the EU do it? Because unfortunately, when you look at the European Union, when you're looking at the European Parliament, the presidency, the European Central Bank, a lot of these individuals, Merz himself was a former CEO of BlackRock. You had Mario Draghi, who was a former president of the European Central Bank, who worked for Goldman Sachs. All these individuals are part of the whole issue with revolving doors, where they have worked and continue to work behind the scenes with American capital and the American financial class. So their interests, the political establishment that have seized power in these centralized institutions that makes up the European Union, are tied to Western capital and Western imperialism. They serve their interests, not the interests of the working people inside the European Union. Yeah, you're going to say something.
Oh yeah, I think that's a great segment to talk about deregulation speedrun.
Yes. Let's go see our friend the CEO of JP Morgan at one point. We have to see that one as well.
Yeah. So, how does this tie into this massive EU's digital deregulation omnibus package?
Yeah. So, I think we've discussed this before as well in the program. Over the course of the past year, we've seen a lot of these companies, whether it's Meta, Google, and this has been an ongoing phenomenon now, anyway, for the last few years, but it's significantly escalated. They want a significant deregulation to take place in the EU, meaning that with regards to environmental issues as well as tech, not censorship per se, but the way in which, to what extent can these American companies, Google, Microsoft, Meta, etc., how and what the fact that they restricted, they have to relieve some of these limitations to basically take complete control over the European markets. Now, up until this point, the EU has sort of been pushing back against that. However, in the course of this past year, Trump has made it a policy of his own. And let's go back, and if we can remind ourselves of his inauguration earlier in January of this year, when the entirety of the Magnificent Seven leadership were at his inauguration. He has been putting a lot of pressure on the EU with his corporate buddies to essentially deregulate. And in just the last couple of weeks, for those that have been watching the news, the EU has significantly slashed a lot of his environmental policy protections, as well as policies related to digital the digital sphere, which would allow these companies, these American tech companies, to be able to essentially kind of do whatever they want in the European Union. And this is a massive blow, again, to the EU. It goes to show the fact that the EU has become completely subordinated. And this subordination happened because of the Ukraine-Russia war. They have become so financially dependent on the imports of LNG and resources now, predominantly from the United States. They're so dependent on the United States, which is ironic because they're talking about becoming independent from Russia, but they've just become overly dependent on the United States in a much more exploitative relationship, when that was not the case in the case of the relationship with Russia. They have no choice now but to accept what the United States and the ruling class there dictate, and they seem to be following exactly that. And it's really important in this particular scenario, because if we look at the economy of the United States itself, the Magnificent Seven, essentially, I think 60% of the market capitulation of the entire, U.S. stock or economy is pretty much these 7 companies.
Yeah,
Amazon, Microsoft, Nvidia holds the vast majority of the U.S. economy on its back. So it's very important for them right now to monopolize, to take over the surplus value which is present in the European Union. It allows them to maintain their own stock market bubble, because, like we said, the entire economy of the U.S. is nothing more than a speculative financial scam. Yeah, I can see you want to say something, so I won't go off on this yet.
No, I just wanted to remind the audience that we did an episode about Venezuela and the AI bubble as well.
Oh yes.
So yes, you can scroll back a couple weeks and find that one. I'll try to find the link, because it's basically we talked about how this worship of GDP is like, people think like the economy is actually doing well because GDP is, but it's all coming from this inflated tech bubble that they're trying desperately not to have burst. So this conquest in Europe, this deregulation conquest, not only deepens the U.S.'s ability to coerce European countries, but it also just kind of is a stopgap measure to keep this whole house of cards from falling down.
Exactly, because, like I've said multiple times before, in competition, it eventually begins to erode, like we've discussed, the tendency of the rate of profit to fall and the creation of overproduction crisis, that in itself, these two create a capital accumulation crisis, which means there is no more avenues left to invest in profitable projects. And so the EU was at one point a competitor. Even though they were allies, they were still a competitor for the United States. That has now been wiped out. And there's an entire market that these corporations are coming in, they're swooping in, and they're taking over, allowing them to sustain themselves. Because capitalism works in this very parasitical way. It expands its tentacles, and it just has to continue taking. Because if it allows, for example, if the EU had continued on the path that it was, cooperating with, endorsing this Eurasian fusion that was taking place with Russia, etc., the EU would have become too powerful for the United States, and it would have been an economic competitor that would have directly threatened the interests of the US and its own economic sort of structure. Because, like you said as well, the entire economy, it's a bubble. It's reliant on the stock market bubble, but it's also reliant on debt. Something that people forget to talk about sometimes when it comes to the US economy. Even debt is calculated as GDP growth in the United States, but it's nothing. It's thin air. But it's like I keep saying, it's an absolute Ponzi scheme. So they needed this defeat of the defeat of the EU. And I remember there's this really great article, for those that are interested, that was written by Michael Hudson. I've referenced it before, but it's called "How the U.S. Defeated Germany for the Third Time." This is what the article is called. But it's an economic breakdown of how effectively the United States was able to devour the U.S. economy, the European economy, and this is essentially what's taking place. And I will also say this one final point: it's the U.S. has a very difficult kind of, path to tread on at the moment. And what do I mean? Because the more they continue to humiliate the EU, to force it to deregulate, to take over huge parts of its industries, and to monopolize its tech industry, etc. This is going to worsen again the material conditions of the Europeans, which is happening rapidly, as we stated, which then itself threatens the very integrity of the European Union as an establishment, because we are seeing these more far-right groups who are somewhat supposedly Euro-skeptic, as well as even more groups on the further left aspect of the spectrum who are also Eurosceptic, are growing increasingly more popular. But as that happens, there is less support for this European project that once existed. And this is a problem, because the very establishment of the European Union as an institution is what I call one of the greatest capitalist projects, because what it did, it was that it coerced all its member states to, I guess, concede its sovereignty to a centralized institution that was run by bureaucrats and individuals that work closely with the financial capitalist order, and it basically destroys sovereignty, and so that's what we're seeing now. Because if we look at the deregulation that's currently taking place in the EU, that applies now ubiquitously throughout 27 member states, and there's nothing that the individual states can really do to alter that. So you can see how in fact, the US now has to both not act too aggressively to completely disintegrate the integrity of the EU, because that allows them to be able to exploit it in the way that it is. And at the same time, they never wanted the EU to become powerful enough to basically be a legitimate competitor, because that would threaten its interests. So you can see how these two contradictions are kind of working against each other here, to establish this kind of maintaining the EU so it's easier to be exploited, but then destroying it at the same time so they're able to infiltrate this centralized bureaucratic establishment and exploit it for its own purposes.
Yeah, it just kind of reminds me, just throwing it all the way back to the Marshall Plan.
Yeah, but it is exactly it's exactly that.
I think we should define terms just for people. Like, just to remind you all, the Marshall Plan, officially called like the European Recovery Program. It was like the U.S. initiative after the Second World War, and they provided like $10 to $15 billion in aid to rebuild Western European economies. Really, it was a measure to deter the spread of communism, foster quote unquote stable subservient democracies, and create strong trading partners for the U.S. That's what it was on paper, and it was, spearheaded by the Secretary of State George Marshall. Its purpose again was to rebuild war-torn economies, combat poverty, political instability. But we all know, the paradigm, with the IMF and World Bank coming in and giving loans and stuff. So, I guess like one of its, big criticisms, of course, the big accusation, which is actually true, was it was a wasteful like Operation Rat Hole, and it was a political tool to interfere with European governments and spread American influence / capitalism throughout the continent and make them kind of subservient to us. And, this is just carrying on the U.S. tradition of doing this in the European continent. It's nothing new.
Oh, yeah, that's why I also said as well, it would, when I said earlier, it would benefit. I mean, if the EU was actually to push for a war with Russia, that would be to the benefit of the American corporate class, or just the ruling elite, wherever they may be. Because I mean, this would issue massive destructive economic blows to Russia and the European continent at the same time, which would reestablish that Marshall Plan, and it would give grounds for great mass exploitation. Like we've seen, for example, in Ukraine, you're going to see all these private equity firms and investment companies taking over swaths of, the economic structures and the rebuilding of Ukraine. But that money is going to go straight into these, into the bank accounts of these multinational corporations. And that's why I wouldn't be surprised if they really do push for war with Russia, and there's something that I wanted to bring up, but I was going to bring up a bit later, but I guess it's relevant here. It's called the spoiler effect. It's not even about winning wars, but a war on its own and the destruction that it can cause will do enough to destabilize, to prevent multipolarity, to prevent BRICS, to prevent things like the BRI, and allow for the largest corporations to swoop in, take over and monopolize large chunks of the global market, and further cement their imperialist control. So they don't even have to win a war, but a war between Russia and Ukraine would definitely be to the benefit of these, I guess, conglomerates, you could say.
Yeah, well, it seems like a good time to pivot to the energy crisis then.
Yes, the energy crisis.
Yeah, like all these things are happening, but at the end of the day, Europe still needs gas. And if you're not going to work with Russia, where the fuck is it going to come from?
Indeed. And that's why rhetorical question. Should I go to answer? Should I answer the rhetorical question?
Yeah, you're leading on this one.
All right. So that's why, this is why we always say on this program, and it's why I always say my own personal work, you have to kind of connect the dots as to why the war in Ukraine and what's happening in Venezuela is connected to what's happening in Gaza, to what's happening in Armenia and Azerbaijan, etc. Because part of the project of what's going on in right now, even in Gaza, the Gaza 2035 project, or the Gaza Riviera project, and all these other projects with regards to establishing pipelines and trade routes and digital connectivity between the Arab and Gulf states, etc., is part of the IMEC dream. And one classic example of that as well is the revival of the East Med project. And I remember actually the first episode that I ever did with you, we kind of discussed it, but we have come a long way since. And just obviously, for those that didn't watch that episode, it has been over 2 years now. Oh no, how long has it been? About 2 years.
I don't even know.
Jesus Christ, I don't even know anymore.
The news cycle's so crazy. Like I feel like I just lost 2 years of my life in a blur. So
yeah, I know. I mean, sometimes a bit more, man. But yeah, so the Eastern Mediterranean project is one that's basically supposed to connect energy connectivity between Israel, Cyprus, and Greece, basically connecting West Asia all the way into Europe. And part and parcel of this project has always been, I mean, even prior to the war in Ukraine, was to provide more diverse sources of energy so that Europe doesn't have to become completely reliant, let's just say, on Russia.
Yeah, it's part of their whole like energy security doctrine, basically diversifying sources. But the entire project since the beginning has been faced by like all these technological hurdles, high costs, geopolitical complexities, especially with regards to Turkey. And, obviously they don't care about the environmental concerns, but its viability is still kind of uncertain, despite them classifying it as like a project of common interest. So,
yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. That's why even interestingly, in April 2022, so in April 2022, it was about a month to 2 months after the SMO in Ukraine had initiated, Victoria Nuland had actually even visited Cyprus for, I think, the first time. And she had basically stated in no uncertain terms that the Eastern Mediterranean project was basically a non-starter, fundamentally because the costs alone to build the infrastructure, to invest in the infrastructure in order to establish this energy connectivity was simply not enough, especially when considering the amount that we're actually talking about that they're going to be extracted. So if we want to talk in actual factual terms, I'll put it to you this way. The EU on average uses annually, prior to 2021. So if we go back to prior to 2022, so in 2021, the EU used 5.7 trillion cubic feet of gas. That's how much it was importing from Russia every single year. The totality of the gas that is located in the Eastern Mediterranean is no more than about, the numbers are estimated around 60 trillion cubic feet, of which the Leviathan, which is the one that belongs to the Zionist state of Israel, has about 20 trillion cubic feet. And Cyprus, for example, has 4.6 trillion cubic feet, meaning that the annual use of gas that was imported by the EU was more than the totality of the reserves that Cyprus has, and about a quarter of what Israel has. So this idea that these diverse forms of energy are going to be coming, even from Azerbaijan, who itself has a very small amount, and then including the Eastern Mediterranean, is going to make up the loss of the Russian gas to Europe is a complete fallacy. And this was actually said very clearly at the time by Victoria Nuland back in 2022. And there was no investment, and the US kind of pulled out from the project entirely, and it kind of died out until recently again. And just like the article that you pulled out, and it's, we're seeing a revival of the Eastern Mediterranean. And in fact, they've established that the US is not only now just being involved, but they're kind of leading the entire project. And they've established the 3+1 energy, what's it called, ministerial, which includes basically Cyprus, Greece, and Israel alongside the United States. And all these finance ministers have been meeting consistently. And the idea is to establish supposedly energy security. And part of this was a sort of, it's Trump's, I guess it's part and parcel of Trump's energy security that he revived. And it's part of a federal body that was established by Trump. It's called the National Energy Dominance Council, that is present now and is participating very strongly in moving the East Mediterranean project forward. And supposedly it's to establish these alternative routes. But what you'll come to find is that the material realities that made it impossible back in 2019 or 2022 are still very much present. Therefore, the idea that it will be able to replace Russian energy and secure Europe and provide these diverse routes of trade is simply ridiculous. But it's this project is also, again, it's outlined in the article that I think you just kind of, we went over it. I think the one that you showed earlier, it's part of IMEC. So again, back to this corridor that's supposed to unite or bring the Gulf monarchies and their energy and their, I guess, trade ambitions and connect it into the EU. But as we've said before, there's political chaos, like you just said. There, you've got the Cyprus problem that needs to be resolved. You've got the issue. You've got the Palestinian struggle for national liberation. You've got Hezbollah sitting in the south of Lebanon that they're trying to push out. You have Syria, which is a complete chaotic mess at the moment, with massive sectarian violence and no sense of national unity. To build in the type of sophisticated infrastructure that they're looking for. And I will just say this one last point, because I know I could go on for a bit, because what they're stating now is, we know that we can't necessarily have gas pipelines because that won't be profitable. But the East Mediterranean now is taking a more pipeline, and the IMEC is taking a more broader approach, and it's supposed to include digital connectivity, green hydrogen, railroads, rail and road links from the Gulf states all the way into Europe. But again, to establish something like that, you need to reshape the entire Middle East and stabilize it. Which is not going to be happening anytime soon. Well, but it's also part of normalization with Israel.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Like, all of this hinges, and like all the conception of the fate of European energy security and relevance also like hinges on normalization with Israel. Like, if you can imagine it, Israel in that conception is like the key that unlocks all this to the Middle East. So of course, that's why they're pushing for massive normalization. I saw a clip from yesterday or from Hanukkah. Donald Trump was speaking to
I missed
this Jewish council or this Hebrew council in DC, and he said, like, we've just signed over the Golan Heights to Israel. But anyway, like this idea of like normalization is very important. And it's also very important to sub-imperial states like the Gulf states as well. It's part of this entire project to reshape the region, which is tied into Europe, which is tied in the United States. And one of the reasons it's not going to work is because it's completely predicated on complete regional stability. And of course, they're having massive problems figuring out how they're going to disarm Hezbollah. Syria is not going to get resolved anytime soon. That's beyond the scope of this discussion, but it's not getting any better. Let's just leave it at that. The Palestine issue is still a massive point of political pressure here domestically with our own politicians, and it's a point of political pressure for all of these Gulf states, these like authoritarian monarchies that are trying to like dance around the issue and figure out how to solve it. And now, of course, you've seen, being in Cyprus, how this is directly the direct involvement of the Gulf states. And now you've had, the prime minister of the UAE and Qatar visit Cyprus. That hasn't really happened before, as you were mentioning.
No. Yeah, it's the first time we've ever had something like that take place in Cyprus. So we're seeing, and I think in the same year, this year, we also had I think it was this year. Yeah, I think it was this year. The Qatar Emir also came to Cyprus. This is unheard of, to see, the most prominent leaders of the Gulf monarchies make their way over to Cyprus, talking to the president. You can see how there's this, what the agenda is for the region as a whole. And, many people have questioned and asked, well, why do the Gulf monarchies, want to engage in all these trade routes and pipelines? Well, they want to diversify their own economies. They want to digitalize. They want to no longer just be oil exporting machines, but they want to become part of the digital era. They want to engage in all these different sorts of economic divestments. And that's why they want to, that's why they're trying to buy out the south of Lebanon and push it out to establish this economic zone. This is why they want to basically take over the Gaza Strip. And this is why now the Gulf monarchies have all of a sudden taken a massive interest inside Cyprus, and they're visiting Cyprus. They need this strategic location. Yeah,
they need the strategic location, and also they need, in the U.S. From the U.S. imperial perspective, they need Turkey to back down and stop trying to become like an energy broker in the region. Because when we were talking about the East Med pipeline, one of the reasons I mentioned political issues with building this thing. It's like Turkey is a major problem for the East Med pipeline project.
Mm-hmm.
It's got massive maritime claims conflicting with Greece, Cyprus, Israel. I think it refused to sign the UNICLOS deal, and it's got to deal with Libya creating more in 2019. Yeah, more
Mm-hmm.
maritime disputes. It's blocked the route to pursue its own energy strategy. And Turkey's assertiveness, driven by its own conception of energy security and regional power aspirations, kind of challenges the pipeline's path through disputed waters and undermines this cooperative framework between the U.S., Europe, the Gulf states, and the region, and basically made the project economically and politically unviable without its participation. And so, they want this pipeline back on the table, and they're gonna try to, I think, and we discussed this before, and being in Cyprus, you probably have more direct exposure to this, get Turkey out of the north of Cyprus and get them to back down on a lot of their regional aspirations.
All right, so there's a lot to say on this one. I'm gonna kind of try to summarize it as best way that I can. So, right, I mean, one could have always argued that Turkey could have always been a key source for energy into Europe. I mean, they are themselves, and if the actual real life Eurasian country, it directly connects West Asia into Europe as a country on its own. However, the Europeans and the general West has always been reluctant to basically rely solely on Turkey to become this energy hub for the EU, because they didn't want to become overly reliant on Turkey, much like they want to be overly reliant on Russia. But they didn't want to give Turkey, which is a massive country with a huge military power as well, the economic prosperity, and to give them all this energy strength in the region. It would outdo, it would basically be too powerful for Israel. It would be basically a regional superpower. And that would obviously
or what the U.S. is mostly concerned about, what they call in neoconservative circles, a regional hegemon.
Yes, exactly. It would have become a regional hegemon that would impede at any particular point the interests of the West. Let's not forget, in any instance that that the Europeans have had agreements with Turkey, even, for example, the agreements that they made with regards to controlling migration and so obviously preventing migrants from entering the EU, Turkey has had a history of using that as political leverage to essentially assert its own will on the EU, stating, oh, we're going to allow the migrants to come in, using people and their, actual human beings who are fleeing war as leverage against the EU. Imagine what kind of that kind of leverage that would providing all the energy resources and pipelines and trade routes into Turkey would have given Turkey over the EU. And this is fundamentally one of the main reasons that the EU has always and the United States has always wanted to put a stopper on Turkey. It's always been viewed as an ally. Yes, they have allied in many particular ways. It has acted as itself a comprador and sub-imperialist, I guess, state, but it's not a reliable ally.
No, because they also
it has its own.
It has its own agenda, and of course,
Mhm.
it's complicated by some of its interests aligned with that of Russia, especially and
Exactly.
expanding Russian influence, especially in Syria.
Exactly. So they did not. The United States does not view Turkey as a reliable partner to have, and that's why they never wanted to collaborate with Turkey and provide all the energy sort of infrastructure to Turkey. And this is now playing out very clearly in what's happening within the region now.
Mhm.
So we know that obviously Turkey is obviously occupying significant portions of Syrian land as well. It's also obviously occupying the north of Cyprus. And interestingly, after 50 years, the United States has taken a very key interest in the occupation of Cyprus in the north. In the end of August of this year, what was rather amusing to me is seeing that a new amendment was kind of put through Congress, where essentially, through the House of Representatives, that requested within 180 days that a report should be published which is going to be, providing an analysis as to what extent the occupation of Cyprus by the Turkish military it provides any sort of threat to the US or its allies within the region. This is very interesting. Up until this particular point in time, the United States had no interest, none whatsoever, as to the Turkish occupation in the north. In fact, it's something that was part and parcel of the United States plan for Cyprus. It was actually the United States back in 1964 that issued and planned this divide known as the Johnson Plan. But now all of a sudden it's become a problem. And this is because they are concerned as to Turkey's strategic influence in Syria, in Cyprus. The fact that Turkey also wants to have a position in the new, international stabilization force and rule of the Gaza Strip. And this is at a time when the United States and the West and Israel are trying to realign the Middle East and to secure these alternative trade routes that they can't actually do because, and Turkey is one of the main reasons right now that they can't, because as you said earlier on, Cyprus has been unable to even begin extraction because Turkey doesn't recognize the Republic of Cyprus as a state, and they're constantly trying to extract gas in the gas fields of Cyprus, for example. They do the same thing in parts of Greece, etc. And this is all in addition to the fact that there's obviously other ongoing conflicts within the region that doesn't allow the West to establish IMEC, which is part and parcel of their desire to also control and contain China's projects as well, and to isolate China and Russia. So
Yeah.
Turkey right now is a problem that they're trying to placate. And that's why there was actually articles, and I'll just finish this point off. In just the last last week or so, we've been seeing articles being published talking about how behind the scenes, the Americans want to be given intelligence access to the north of Cyprus.
Mhm.
And that would make sense because as far as they're concerned, the north of Cyprus is this gray area because it's not internationally recognized. There's no real control or surveillance as to what's going on. And the United States wants in, as well as Israel, as to what's actually happening in the north. And they're phrasing that as the north of Cyprus is becoming a threat to national security interest of the US, and it's harboring Hamas and Hezbollah, etc. This is all nonsense. What they want is, they're warning Turkey, if you want to continue the occupation, if you want to strategically maintain control of the northern territories there, then we need to have access as well. Or otherwise, goes back to what the Israel Hayom article was saying, the liberation of Cyprus is going to become an Israeli problem. So ironically, the very future of this island is defined not by the will of its people, but by actually what's going to happen between the negotiations between the US and Turkey, Israel, among many other things.
Yeah. Sorry. While you were discussing that, I actually found the interview I was looking for to kind of really drive this home and kind of actually give a number of sources for why we're saying this. Okay. So here we go. Foreign Affairs reports. Okay. Victoria Coates. She's a former U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor during Trump for the during the first Trump administration, and she is now she is the vice president of the Heritage Foundation. which is arguably the most influential think tank in Washington at the moment. And, she's saying that the natural gas from the Eastern Mediterranean, even if more expensive, is essential for the emerging reality of heightened global energy demand and security. So one of my favorite quotes that from this was, the Turks just have a way of looking at the map of the Mediterranean and drawing whatever they want. What they did with Libya memorandum, I'm sorry, but where's Crete on this map? So during this interview with a Greek magazine, she says, kind of like telltale whistles, they kind of telegraph exactly what they're going for. So a stronger Israel can be very useful in the region, correct? Correct, she says. What we're trying to say is that we are entering a new kind of Cold War, this time with China. The U.S. will need to focus its strategic attention there, and the idea is to build up capable partners and allies who can take responsibility for their own region. Another reason why Turkey needs to be phased out, because we're obviously going to clearly back Israel. So in this interview,
quantitative, the QME, there you go. We have to. The QME is actually Cold War doctrine.
Yeah.
But go on.
So under the new model, will the U.S. continue to uphold Israel's quantitative military edge? We have to. The QME is actually Cold War doctrine. It's what we originally came up with NATO to deal with the Soviets, who were always going to have overwhelming numerical superiority. A great example of how that works was Operation Spiderweb that the Ukrainians just pulled off. Then they talk about regional integration, expanding the Abraham Accords, and here we go. When it happens, it would completely unlock the IMEC project, right? Correct. This will be the practical outcome when the Saudis no longer have a boycott against Israel. IMEC is a wonderful initiative that links India, which I think will be emerging as one of America's key partners in the second half of the 21st century, not only with the Gulf and the Arabian Peninsula, but then through Haifa and up to Europe. So this is a physical manifestation of the kind of regional integration we're talking about here. And it's all about icing out China and, establishing, again, this energy security doctrine. It's all right there. If I say it out loud.
It is. And the thing is, because we discussed how physically, they speak about these things as though there aren't millions of people living in this region with 101 different political issues.
It's for them. It's just like great power politics. And they always get blindsided when things like a popular revolution happens or like some political discontent happens. Like they're talking about this like it's going to happen. But there are so many existing problems with it that it's kind of like I've always had this sense since I started like following foreign affairs, coming out of the military, going to Colombia, which is like the pipeline to the UN. Like all these people are just like high on their own supply.
Yeah, they are. And this is the thing. So they haven't even started building the infrastructure really yet. I mean, this is the thing. You're talking about, first of all, dealing with political issues within the region. You're trying to get rid of Hezbollah. You're trying to consolidate power over Lebanon. You're trying to consolidate power over Syria. You barely consolidate power over Iraq. Now you're trying to do the same thing to Cyprus. I mean, I'll put it to you this way. There's this is obviously more local news and things that, the audience here will know. So I'll just, relay this information. Just 2 weeks ago, a month ago now, in November in Cyprus, in the occupied territories, the Cypriots, the Turkish-speaking Cypriots, voted for a one-state solution. I mean, they actually voted for their president or their leadership that wants a one-state solution. This was a massive blow to Turkey at a time that Turkey is already under considerable pressure from the United States to ease and dilute its control inside the north of Cyprus. So this is going to be very interesting how this is going to play out based on, how these power politics are going to be played. But again, we haven't started building any of this infrastructure. It's going to take several decades even to be able to establish that. And that's given if there is political stability to even encourage the type of investment that back until 2022, it was the Americans that said was an impossibility to even happen, because the United States genuinely did not think that Russia would be able to have survived the economic warfare that was imposed on them. They thought that Russia was going to capitulate, that they were going to lose the war. To quote Biden, the ruble will become rubble, and that would have been it. And then the Americans would have gone in, Putin would have fallen, and that was that. That's why they, at that point, basically pulled out of the Eastern Mediterranean project, and they didn't take the IMEC project even that seriously. But things haven't gone to plan, and the same thing is going to happen now. But I will say this one thing: there's there's only one benefit that comes as well from having the IMEC project, and this is what I will say, is that it allows, by creating, by pushing forward for these relationships and the establishment of IMEC, it becomes a rival and a competitor to the BRI and to China's own aspirations. And that creates in itself a form of instability in terms of for China to establish those long-term relations with some of the neighboring states here. And, you know, it disrupts relationships for China. It disrupts relationships for Russia as well. And we already saw that when for example, what the sort of the regime change that happened in Syria, already we saw how this has disrupted plans, goals, and aspirations for Russia, especially, and China in the region, as well as for Iran. This is another aspect here, how Iran fits into all this. Because obviously the whole idea is to encircle and contain Iran as well as Russia and China, etc. So it's part of this containment strategy that the United States is trying to use by leveraging IMEC. No matter how actual plausible it is, it still is that splinter by creating that sort of destabilization in the region, even with the wars. That's a win, because it prevents it prevents a stable sort of West Asia from being established. It provides alternatives, and it pushes back against China being able to cement itself in the region. So these are some of the benefits that come from it.
Yeah, and you know, this is just another thing I was thinking about the other day. Very unlikely that that India will go be buddies with China, but like dangling the IMEC corridor is a good incentive for them to stay within the Western sphere of influence, even though they've kind of maintained strategic autonomy throughout the Cold War and kind of developed a free market relationship with the United States while buying like Russian weapons and stuff like that. We still need them on our side.
No, exactly. So this is what this does. It prevents long-term infrastructure from being developed. It prevents long-term deals from being established with China. And that delay, well, they want that delay. It's about postponing the inevitable, and by postponing that, it gives them more time to be able to strategize. And these are some of the United States is very good at doing that. I have to say that they're very good at postponing the inevitable.
It's really, well, it's just, again, it's a stopgap measure. You know, it's that, but you know, it's, if you can't solve a problem, just create chaos and play for time.
Yeah, it's short-term solutions. It does also it also sustains their profit margins. It sustains their, like we said before, their stock market values and their inflated artificial economy by creating these artificial opportunities throughout the region, as well as obviously in Europe that has been completely, I guess, stripped of any sort of economic sovereignty and pretty much handed over. It's nothing more than I would say just like a financial colony itself now of the United States, and the system keeps fueling itself. So these are some of the, like I said, it's short-term gains. This is always how capitalism operates. It's all these counter tendencies, but they're always temporary. The long-term impacts, I just see, honestly, a lot of their operations within the region are not going to work. There isn't going to be, whether it's Cyprus, whether it's Syria, whether it's even in Armenia and Azerbaijan. I think Armenia today, they even, they put forward their own, security proposal with the EU, which is agitated Azerbaijan. And obviously, you have the Nagorno-Karabakh situation, which is not too different to like what's happening in many, it's as in the politics of it is rather similar to what's happening in Gaza, etc. So it's these expectations of normalizing these locations to establish infrastructure. It's not going to happen. It can delay. I'm sure it's going to be a splinter for China and Russia's and Iran's operations, but they just simply, the U.S. does not have the economic and political or military infrastructure to continue sustaining this on the long run.
Plus, like this thing's eventually, this whole party is eventually going to burst. I was just like skimming through while you're talking about that, more of this interview, and it only gets worse. I just want to point this out because this is something we talked about in that Venezuela AI data center episode. Are the electricity interconnections, interconnections here being, the global infrastructure for how to establish like energy security, and that involves like the East Med pipeline, the IMEC. Then there's another pipeline around the Horn of Morocco that they're working on. all these interconnections equally important to this administration. She says, the power we are going to need to generate and that we will be consuming in our new AI data center world is going to be off the charts. And that's why we need the natural gas to feed the generators to provide the electricity. But I'm more concerned about that than I am about the electricity interconnectors. One of the problems with the previous administration, Biden, approach is that they just assumed there was some magical source of electricity with zero emissions. That really didn't make very much progress. They continued to burn more oil, coal, and gas every year than the previous year, but they kind of pretend like they were. They said they were going to phase that out and somehow the electricity fairy would show up and there would be all this electricity. But no, in this new world, we have to fuel our cutting edge data facilities with 19th century technology. And again, these are not long-term solutions, and it's not going to. As you stated, it's going to take too long to build up the infrastructure for these energy interconnectors. Anyways, so I don't know, what are we doing here? Apparently, we're going to war with Russia, and
they don't even have the rare earths. They don't even have. They can't even refine the rare earths. They're relying on China for that. That they're also going to war with China.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. And Sam Altman for OpenAI has this whole program called Compute, which is supposed to be the massive like supply chain choke point. You know, they can build the data centers or they can expand them, in terms of like software and technology, but they can't physically make them and power them fast enough because they don't have any of this. They don't have the energy infrastructure and they don't have the rare earths. And China basically refines all the rare earths, so we have to go through them anyways. It's just a house of cards, man. But yeah, how do you want to round this one off? It's
how do I round this off?
If you keep reading the interview, she talks about Erdogan and how he's a problem, but eventually, he will be replaced. It's yeah. So
Ooh, I actually discussed this in another interview that I did just 2 days ago. Actually, the interviewer, which was Dimitris Askaris, he had actually asked me, "Oh, what do you think is going to happen with Erdogan?" I'm like, "Well, either he's going to capitulate and he's going to have to surrender some of his powers in the north of Cyprus. If he wants to leave, if they want to still have the north of Cyprus, they will have to surrender, or he will lose the entirety of the north of Cyprus, including his aspirations in the region with Syria, Lebanon. Or if they don't, and I said this before, even on this show." Turkey is economically weak. It doesn't have its own, it relies on like 60% of its businesses use the American dollar because the lira has been inflated due to his own failing economic policies to deal with inflation. The vast majority of business in Turkey relies on the dollar, which gives the United States very significant leverage over Turkey that can easily be used, and even the slightest tweak, the slightest smallest sanction even would cripple the economy enough for a short period of time to enrage the Turkish population against them. And then what? The main opposition in Turkey they're liberal and very pro EU. So I mean, there isn't really much choice in Turkey in terms of push. You've got this conservative neo-Ottomans, just a face in Erdogan, and then you have the liberals. That's pretty much it. And if he doesn't abide, that's fine. The next party, the opposition, they'll abide. They have a very pro-Western liberal politics overall. So this is why when they're discussing Turkey, even in this article that you're quoting from now, it's very easy to replace him and he will lose to the opposition, and the United States will still have great relations with the next ruling party.
Yeah, I mean, it says right here, question, but for as long as Erdogan is there, things are going to remain the same? Question mark. Answer. I think it's going to remain full of friction. It's a huge challenge because they, being Turkey, are a fellow NATO member. We have an important base there. They can be a terrific partner and ally, and they have been a terrific partner and ally in the past, but they aren't right now, and there's no way to sugarcoat that. I'm also very interested to see the role of the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, Tom Barak. He's very active. Unquote.
Yeah, it's what I said before. Turkey has been a great ally. That's why the United States didn't take a single slightest interest in the fact that they were illegally occupying the north of Cyprus. But now all of a sudden it's like, well, this doesn't seem right. We need to deal with it. And
Yeah.
like out of nowhere, the United States has remembered that they're occupying countries. So it's what I said, your allies, and this is how the international, I guess, this is how imperialism works. There is a hierarchy even within the ruling classes, and ultimately there's an international trans-capitalist alliance that takes place with different sort of bourgeois leaderships, but they're not all equal within the sphere of within the spectrum of, I guess, the imperial powers. And eventually the more powerful will devour characters like Erdogan if they do not fall in place. And so this is what's going to happen in this part of the world, because they do need to, they're at a desperate point where, the desperation of the United States is it's very evident what's happening in Venezuela. Did you see today what Trump posted just on Twitter, I think just a couple of hours ago, with regards to Venezuela?
I'll pull it up, because it is absolutely the most unhinged shit I've seen in a minute. Let me pull up X.
I mean, it does fit the narrative. It does fit the episode. So, do you have it?
Okay, yeah. Well, it's kind of goes back to my the fall of the Roman Republic analogy that I started with. Now the trappings of decorum and being like a shining city of the hill on the hill are done. Now we're just going straight imperial, baby. Trump. Pulling it up, the real Donald Trump. Okay,
Trump,
so I know he posted it. I know.
No, it wasn't on Twitter. Oh yeah.
Oh, was it on Truth Social?
I think it was on Truth Social.
Yeah, he posts his most unhinged stuff on Truth Social. So let's go. Do you have an account?
Do I have? Oh no, I don't.
I
did post.
You can't post truths?
No, I can't post truths. It's not something that I do. I don't know. I guess it's just not what I do. I have it here. I have it for when I could read it out, but
I want to see it. Look, like half of the stuff on Truth Social is like just straight up marketing. I don't know. Maybe, yeah, just read it, because it's unhinged. I can't find it.
Venezuela is completely surrounded. This is what he says. Venezuela is completely surrounded by the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America. It will only get bigger, and the shock to them will be like nothing they have ever seen before. Until such time as they return to the United States of America all of the oil and land and other assets that they previously stole from us. Yeah, I know. Venezuelan land.
Okay, Simone Trolivar.
He goes on. The illegitimate Maduro regime is using oil from the stolen oil fields to finance themselves, drug terrorists, human trafficking, murder, and kidnapping. Hold on, I lost it. Hold on. I lost it. I just accidentally lost it. Okay, it's back. I've got it here. All right. Drug terrorism, human trafficking, murder, and kidnapping. Oh, yeah. For the theft of our assets and many other reasons, including terrorism, drug smuggling, human trafficking, the Venezuelan regime has been designated a foreign terrorist organization. Therefore, today, I am ordering a total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers going into and out of Venezuela. The illegal aliens and criminals that the Maduro regime has sent into the United States during the weak and inept Biden administration are being returned to Venezuela at a rapid pace. America will not allow criminals, terrorists, or other countries to rob, threaten, or harm our nation, and likewise will not allow a hostile regime to take our oil, land, or any other assets, all of which must be returned to the United States immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter.
Thank you for your attention to this matter. I'm so mentally exhausted that I just want to take a week off, but leave's canceled, boys. Like this is going down. So he's scheduled about an hour after we post this message to make a massive presidential announcement tonight.
Oh, I didn't know. I missed that. I didn't know. Okay. Well, this is going to be interesting. The thing is, okay, so I mean, obviously, it goes a bit away. It is connected to what we're discussing, but I find it very interesting the degree of military posturing and gunboat diplomacy that the U.S. is engaging in. I mean, I've read multiple articles and sort of simulations. The United States doesn't have the military capacity. We've even gone through this now to be able to put forward not just an invasion of Venezuela, but like a long-term we discussed this in our previous episode, a long-term military, operation in Venezuela, because you do need to be the long-term to reestablish and put an actual puppet state and have that work out. I honestly think that they're trying to terrorize the Venezuelan people. They'll probably bomb some infrastructure here and there.
We'll hit some military hard sites, I think.
Yeah, that's what they're going to try and do. And then
when land strikes happen, I think they'll confine it to a lot. Well, first it'll start with military targets, and then they'll do civilian infrastructure like power grids, water desalination plants, stuff like that. Basically, kind of what the Israelis did in Gaza, because that's been normalized going forward.
And Lebanon. Yeah. So what you do is that you inflict, and even in Syria, I mean, when you look at the long-term repercussions of like the embargo and the trade wars in Syria, it hollowed out the economy so much. I mean, this is a crime against humanity. I keep saying this over and over again. Sanctions, embargoes, they are illegal under international law because of the repercussions that it has on the civilian population. And this is what they're going to try to do in full force right now. And also, again, what does this do? It obstructs China's deals and progress inside of Venezuela, and it destabilizes a key oil exporting partner, which is the most important partner for Venezuela outside of Russia, for China outside of Russia. This is what this does, and all the trillions that have been spent to in these new projects that China has been investing in rebuilding the infrastructure and building all these, bullet trains, etc., is going to be automatically put to a halt. And this is another reason, like I said before, this is what I'm talking about, the spoiler effect. They absolutely need to destabilize, even if it means they won't get what they want. If you've hollowed out the economy enough, you might turn the people against Maduro. That's what they've been doing. They've been trying to do in Iran, for example, put enough pressure, people will turn against their state, and then we'll swoop in. That's what this embargo is. And also they're also aiming at Cuba with this as well. They're also aiming at Cuba with this.
Absolutely. The tanker that was seized had about $60 million worth of oil that was destined for Cuba. So of course, all of these right-wing Cuban American ideologues that are dominating the State Department in the form of Marco Rubio, Representative Salazar, who actually put Maria Corina Machado in for the Nobel Peace Prize in the first place, basically ideologically just want to collapse anything that was like revolutionary or left wing on the Latin American continent. So if they can hit two birds with one stone, Venezuela and Cuba, they'll be happier for it.
I mean, this is what they're trying to do. So I don't see a full military, full dedicated military like in the form of Iraq.
Okay. Well, first of all, I've been looking at the asset allocation. There's only about 4,000 ground troops available that can establish a beachhead, but it can't establish an occupation. That's not enough to even like invade a small city. Like it's a division. It's tiny. It's tiny. So no, I think they'll be concentrated to land strikes, military targets, civilian infrastructure, and then of course we know special forces groups and CIA ground branch has crossed the border from Colombia into Venezuela, and they're rallying dissident militias and stuff. That's been on the books, and we've known that's been going on for some time. So that's what it's going to be limited to. But then again, to all my people on the right who are definitely not listening to this, if you're concerned about the immigration crisis, guess where all of those people who are going to be displaced by a regime change war are going to go? They can't go to Colombia. They can't go to Mexico. They can't stay anywhere. The only place that they can have any sort of shelter. This is what happens every time with all of these imperial wars, where people have to flee from the periphery to the core in order to just stop being bombed and killed. So happened in Guatemala, happened here. So that's kind of what we're looking at. And in the meantime, this government has nothing to offer you. We will not see the trickle down economic effects of, enriching oil barons in the United States. So, yeah, guys, that's Merry Christmas. Everyone's getting coal in their stockings, except for the CEOs of the Magnificent Seven and other people like that. So, I think we're at like the 90-minute mark, and you certainly did a good job of covering a lot of stuff.
I think so.
You're stuck up here.
I think we both did, yes.
Stuck up here in Boston. It's like 19 degrees outside. Sorry, I know we have a lot of like outside of the continental U.S. audience. I don't know what that is in Celsius, but in Fahrenheit, it's cold. Okay, and yeah, I was going to try and take some sort of like vacation, but I guess I guess the war machine never sleeps, so I guess I'll have to do something this weekend after we start attacking everybody. But I'll be on standby for when this thing lights up, because I think it's going to light up, and we'll try to do live commentary, because this is the Iraq War of our generation. And as my buddy Will said in his video, we have all the information. Like, we know what's going on. They're not even bothering to lie about it anymore because we've entered a new phase of United States imperial aggression.
Exactly.
Suicidal end run capitalism, baby. Let's go. Build those data centers. Build a pipeline that's never going to actually come to fruition, but just keep talking about it. I don't know. There's like too much to talk about. We kept saying, this is like the third episode that I've been like, don't worry, guys. We're going to finally talk about the Thai-Cambodian border conflict.
Oh, yes, we must. We do. There's a lot. I feel like that should be an episode of its own, though.
Yeah. I mean,
because there's a lot. Do you know what I feel like? Because there's also been a lot of revelations now with regards to. Did you see the Gray Zone published Nepal? But how that's connected to probably to what's happening in Thailand, Cambodia, and also the fact there's been a lot of evidence that suggests you're seeing that kind of Ukrainian drones, etc., that are being used by Cambodia. So what we could be looking at here is similar to these indirect avenues by which to destabilize key regions around China. Again, it's part of this destabilization because we've seen the same thing happen right now in the Sahel Alliance as well, that the main opposition is using these weapons that are heading for Ukraine, but they're finding themselves in Cambodia and around the Sahel Alliance states in order to combat actors that the U.S. desires to destabilize for their own purposes. But I mean, I feel like that's a bigger topic. I don't know if what you want to say about it now.
I'll just say it's not just a lot of the media framing is that this border conflict's basically just coming up out of nowhere because of when after Siam became Thailand and French Indochina was kind of like partitioning all these countries up. It comes from an old map in 1907, and nobody really knows where Thailand begins and Cambodia ends. So randomly there's a border conflict, and of course there's a lot of contested temples, stuff like that, but it's not just that. It's not just a relic of old colonialism that this is popping up now. So remain vigilant, look behind the headlines, and we should honestly cover this again, because I think the fighting stopped, but it's definitely gonna pick up again.
No, it's going to pick up. I don't think there's been a proper ceasefire has been fully established, because they have come close to that, but then it keeps escalating over and over again. But yeah, I do think it's important to cover, because like you said, obviously you can see again how former colonial powers in the form of France, etc., again, the concept of dividing territories, and they do it in such a way so as to continue to facilitate conflict around the world that then ultimately serves them, so they can infiltrate themselves into these regions and use this kind of internalized dichotomies in order to exploit them. And we're kind of seeing that manifest now. Obviously, we've seen, the United States has bombed Cambodia before in order to target even leftists and communists. So there is a history there of infiltrating this particular region. But right now, what we're seeing, based on some of the evidence that I've personally seen, we could be looking at subtle nudges, training or funding, or providing weapons to this particular part of the world in order to destabilize this region because of its proximity to China, because of its importance to BRICS. Because like I said before, it's important to destabilize. This prevents projects from going forward. It prevents peaceful not just negotiations, but also long-term goals and infrastructure from being established. So it wouldn't be surprising. I think that's why it's important to cover that. But I think you do need a whole episode. I actually think we should do a whole episode in regards to
let's do a whole episode, because people are kind of reducing it to this small border conflict where only 40 to 100 people have been killed. Almost 500,000 people are displaced right now on both sides. Yeah. That's hugely destabilizing for any sort of regional project. So we'll do. Okay, I promise. We're gonna do this thing.
How's the holiday looking? How's the week off looking?
I just want a week off. Okay.
About 5 minutes after you said, okay, so guys, we're going to take a week off. You're like, okay, so Venezuela might go off, so we're going to have to probably come back. And we might have to do East Asia.
Now we got to go. Now we got to go to South Asia. Yeah. So, anyways, that's what we do here at Colonial Outcasts. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know we covered a lot of ground, and the theme was, this is now the fall of the Roman Republic, just even worse because we got capitalism now. So Merry Christmas, y'all, and we'll be on standby. And
Merry Christmas, everybody. Yes.
Yeah, Merry
we'll be on
Christmas.
standby.
Yeah, we'll be on standby. You guys have a great rest of your week. Mark and I are going to do an episode about like practical, like revolutionary stuff, like building alternative sources of power and class consciousness with one of the with a couple Black Panthers out of the Berkeley chapter. That's being recorded tomorrow. And that will be like kind of our answer to be like, okay, what's the plan, Lefty? What's the plan if you don't want to vote for Jasmine Crockett? This is the plan. All right. This is the plan. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see you next time.